Hello, it's Tamara here from tamaradon.com, Transformation for Women. And yesterday was the last day of a 2-year course that I've been doing with the Centre for Systemic Constellations. And it's been a most amazing journey, and I just wanted to share some of that journey with you today. So I came across family constellations probably about 10 years ago when my dear friend Anna told me about it, because at the time I was experiencing a challenging relationship with my mother. And the first time I attended was on a family camp, which was a week-long camp with various workshops going on. And as soon as I tried it, I knew this was for me. I could feel it in my being. And then the first time I was a representative, which means that someone in a workshop brought a problem to the workshop, and they chose members of the workshop participants to represent various family members. And the person who was the issue holder, that's the one with the problem, was adopted, and they wanted to come to some kind of resolution around the fact that they'd been adopted and they couldn't find their parents. And as soon as the problem was stated, I just knew I was going to be the mother. It was just a bizarre feeling. And so when I stepped into the circle, so everyone sits in a circle, and then the issue holder places the representatives in a configuration in the centre of the circle. And as soon as I stepped into that circle, I felt like I was in this invisible soup of energy where everything that happened to other people in that invisible soup affected me. It was almost like, when you throw a stone into a pond and it ripples. Well, it was like I could feel those ripples. And the person who represented the issue holder, as in the one who'd been adopted, was actually a friend of mine. And she, when I looked at her, even though she was my friend in normal life, when I looked at her, I felt complete and utter disgust for this person, and I wanted absolutely nothing to do with her. And these feelings weren't mine. They just came as if out of nowhere. And I felt very young, and I just didn't want anything to do with that, with my child. And I can't really remember what happened in the constellation, but at the end I remember that I, as in the mother of this adopted baby, met my child and my grandchildren, and the grief that I experienced as a representative for these family members who I had never met and who I didn't know was almost unbearable. It was really bizarre. And even when the constellation finished, I was crying almost cathartically in this experience. It really was a very, very powerful experience. And but I kind of thought, this is fantastic. And then it was really bizarre, because a few months later I got this phone call from Julie Toms, who was the facilitator of that particular workshop, and she told me that the person who'd been the issue holder had asked her to contact me to let me know that they had found their mother, even though there had been there had been no possibility of that happening. And I guess that person had been searching for a long time beforehand and hadn't found the mother. So that was kind of like the most amazing resolution, really, really incredible. So that was my first real experience of family constellations. And then I did lots of work on my own family history, and I'm really pleased to say that it really helped my relationship with not only my mother, who I'm now extremely close to, but all my relationships, both my parents, my brother, my husband, my daughter, all of them have just changed leaps and bounds since I've been doing this work, which is fantastic. But I want to share with you one other really bizarre experience I had. And I just remember being in this constellation, and I was going to be an issue holder, and usually I knew exactly what my intention for that constellation would be, and I got a really strong sense of when it was my time to present my issue, because what happens is there are, I guess, 6 issue holders, and the constellator says, okay, who feels that they're going to go next? And I always had a certain knowledge that when it was my time, I could feel it in my being. And I arrived at this particular constellation, and I was like, I don't really know why I'm here. I don't know what I'm going to work on, and I have no sense of when I want to do it, which maybe for some people is quite normal, but for me it felt really bizarre and unusual. And so someone, I think, did a constellation, maybe another person did a constellation, and then all of a sudden we were having a break, and I had this sudden sense of urgency that I had to be next. It was such a strong sense in my whole being, and I said to the constellator in the break, I really need to go next. And she said, well, check with the other people first, and we just have to see if anyone else feels the same, and then just see who needs to go next. So I just went up to every single other issue holder and said, I really need to go next, is that okay with you? And they were like, yeah, sure. And so I couldn't get to the issue holder seat fast enough. I was like almost running there. And I actually can't remember what issue I brought, bizarrely enough. And the actual constellation, I didn't really understand, and it didn't really have any impact on me. And I thought, I don't know what that was about at all. But the really bizarre thing was that when I got home that evening to my husband and daughter, they told me that during that day, my grandfather, who was 105 at the time, had died. And I said, what time did he die? And the really weird thing was that he died exactly at the time when I was doing my constellation. And I feel all tingly just telling you about that, which is really bizarre. But and then my first thought was like, oh my goodness, I've killed my grandfather. But obviously I don't think I did. It was obviously his time. And I spoke to the constellator after that, and I think probably maybe there was some unfinished business for him that needed to happen before he was ready to make that transition. Who knows? I'll never know, but it was an interesting synchronicity, shall we say. I'm lucky enough to have the most amazing neighbour. Well, she lives across the road to me, Kim Good, who is a family constellator. And I've been to loads of her amazing constellations, and whenever I had questions, she was always there to answer my questions and talk about it. And often we go for lovely morning walks together and we talk constellations. So I'm very blessed to have her on my doorstep. And since the very beginning, since I first knew about constellations, I brought my knowledge into my work in all different shapes and forms. So, for example, if I was working one-to-one with one of my clients, we might draw various family members in a constellation, or sometimes I would get them to imagine various scenarios of a constellation in their mind, which is actually a system created by Deborah Dondelinger, who created something called family energetics, which is a form of EFT with family constellations. So sometimes I'd do that, and sometimes I would write on bits of paper family members and put them around the room and get my client to stand on them and see how she felt, and then maybe do some tapping on those emotions that arose. And more recently I've invested in some colourful felts, and they can choose a different piece of felt to represent a different family member or a different aspect of the problem. And I've worked in that way as well. So maybe at this point I should just say what exactly my understanding of family constellations is. Family constellations, my understanding or my interpretation is that if you have a headache and you go to a doctor, they will treat your head. If you go to an alternative therapist, maybe an acupuncturist or a homeopath or even an EFT practitioner, they will take your whole being into account. And if you go to a family constellator, they will take your whole family into account when considering how to address this problem. It's not like the whole family has to actually come with you, but we just use representatives, as I described earlier, to represent the other family members, although obviously they can come to a workshop if they wanted to. So why address the whole family? If you imagine a baby's mobile with lots of toys dangling around, rotating in a circle, if one of those toys is pulled down, the remaining toys will move upwards in order to maintain a balance. And the same thing is true for families. If something happens to one member of a family and it isn't addressed and recognised, it will impact other family members. And that could be family members down the line. So if something happened, say, in your grandparents' era, then it could impact future generations, so their children or your children. As I said before, for the last 2 years I have been training and doing the most amazing training at the Centre for Systemic Constellations in London, and it's been an incredible journey. And for the last 2 years I've been on this wonderful journey with the Centre of Systemic Constellations in London, and I've been incorporating my knowledge into my work in various different ways. So, as I said, one-to-one clients I've been working, I bring it into my Red Tent retreats, which are my monthly retreats for women, which I hold. And we don't specifically do a constellation, but I will always bring some of that work into the workshops. And it could be things like exploring your relationship with your menstrual cycle through constellations, or exploring your relationship with your femininity, or exploring your relationship with busyness and stillness, because the Red Tent retreat is all about taking time out for yourself. So those are ways that I use that in the Red Tent retreats. I also run workshops for women to help them connect with their ancestral line, because in the family constellation theory there's a flow of love that goes from one generation to the next, from great-grandmother to mother to daughter to her children, and that flow starts from the beginning of time. But sometimes that flow of love gets interrupted through things like war or famine or early deaths or family secrets or missing people in the family, people who've been forgotten. So those kind of things can actually cause interruptions in that flow of love, and that can then manifest in difficult relationships, maybe with your mother or her with her mother. And then it can also impact how you live your life. So not just if you're a parent, how you mother, but how you appear in the world, how you present yourself to the world. So by strengthening that flow of love from all the generations before you, it can help you in all different ways in your life. And on the 28th of September, the 28th of this month, I have one of those workshops called Heal Yourself Through Your Mother Line. And if you want to know more about that, then do check out my website, tamaradon.com. And in November of last year, I was lucky enough to give a presentation at the Guild of Energists conference, then known as the AMT, about using EFT with family constellations. And in that presentation, I spoke about how the flow of love from one generation to the next is so important and how it can be broken. And we talked about how we can start healing that flow of love using family constellations and EFT. And I'm very excited that I am going to be bringing aspects of family constellation work to EFTers, and I'm going to be running little mini modules for EFTers to learn more about family constellations and how they can incorporate family constellation theory into their EFT work. And that's going to be starting this coming November, so watch out for that. Now, I wanted to share a testimonial that I received from one of my clients. I'm just going to read this out. Having spent a few occasions under Tamara's guidance with family constellations, it had always been an utterly fascinating process. Each time I've been a representative, which meant I have cried other people's tears and felt others' feelings, it's always been a very powerful experience. Last week, however, I was an issue holder, and my word, this incredible process succeeded in shifting a belief that was so deeply held, I didn't even realize it was there. The intensity of the experience was very gently facilitated by Tamara, who skillfully knew what questions to ask, when to ask them, all the time creating an atmosphere of safety so that the emotions were allowed to flow. If that wasn't powerful enough, the knock-on effect to family members who were not even present in the room with us was phenomenal. A deeply healing journey held in experienced, kind and gifted hands. And that's from my lovely dear friend and EFT practitioner, Leora Lebov. So if you would like to know more about family constellations or any of the other workshops that I've mentioned, do visit tamaradon.com. If you're an EFT practitioner wanting to know more about that, then do visit eft-courses.org.uk.